How's it going? And welcome back to On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe, and as always, I am joined by the 2020 TGFBI champion, Kevin Haston. Kevin, we are only 2.5 weeks away from our first Fab deadline. Are you ready?
I better be. We all better be. And that's what tonight's all about. So let's just get right to it.
All right. As anyone who's listened to us in the past 5 weeks knows, we like to bring on guests to help focus our attention, especially during these off-season episodes. In season, we'll continue the tradition of having a guest on most episodes, trying to figure out where the Fab is going to be spent, and so we can make educated recommendations on the best ways to spend that Fab each week. The more voices, the better. So today's a perfect example of that sentiment, as we have 4 separate guests joining us. First, from the In the Deep podcast, we have Jordan White and Chris Weber. Glad to have you guys joining us tonight. Could you guys take a moment to let our listeners know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, we host the In the Deep podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network, also a proud member. Me and my baseball wife, Christopher Weber here, love ourselves some deep leagues, so thank you for asking us on this episode. You can follow us at In the Deep PL if you'd like to hear about our episode drops and things like that, or individually for me at Bun Singles. And Chris, want to tell me your handle?
Yes, I could be found on Twitter at Schwebsy, SHWEBSI. And I really look forward to listening to all you guys so that I could just steal your work and not do any research of my own.
I mean, that's why we're all here. All right. And so on my right, we have a pair from the Keep or Cut podcast, Chad Young and Pete Ball. Chad, Pete, I appreciate you guys taking the time to join this little endeavor as well. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you guys do.
So we are, as said, the hosts of the Keep or Cut podcast. I think I'm supposed to say that we are also proud members of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I feel like we need to start working that into our show more, Pete. I don't know if we've said we're proud before. But Keep or Cut is a podcast focused on keeper leagues and auto new leagues. So we're mostly looking at some long-term kind of stuff. But these end of draft times are super important for those. So we're excited to be here. You can follow the pod on Twitter at Keep or Cut. Cut is with a K. So it's Keep or Cut, but cut with a K. And you can also find us on there. I'm available at Chad Young. Pretty straightforward. Pete, what about you?
Yeah, you can follow me at Pete B Baseball. We can appreciate the pun there with my last name. Endless puns with that name.
All right, guys, we're going to get right into it. Usually we start off with what we call like a moving targets segment of our pod, where we talk about guys who are going post 350 in current ADP markets, about guys that we're looking to pick up with our last, pick or two in a 12-teamer, one of our last couple picks in a 15-teamer. We're going to forego that today, mainly because the main theme of today's pod, what we're going to talk about, is we got together recently and did a little mock draft. We did a mock draft between the 3 podcasts, and the rules were simple. You could only pick players who with an ADP of at least 350. Now, I'm going to put that in a little context. We used ADP from NFBC's draft champions over the last month. So get a little specific. We wanted to make sure that our ADP really reflected what was going on recently. And I wanted to pick draft champions because obviously those are much, much deeper, and all these players are being drafted in all of those leagues. I believe there were about 29 drafts in that time period as well. So a good sample size. And the rosters themselves were specific. So make sure that we got a good range of different types of players. So the rosters were 1 middle infielder, 1 corner infielder, 1 outfielder. So 3 hitters, and then 3 pitchers. But one of them had to be a starting pitcher. One of them had to be expected to be a reliever. And then there was an additional pitcher on there as well. So 3 pitchers, 3 hitters for each team. There are 3 teams. And obviously each pod has 2 people on it. So we'll have lots of different voices talking about it. And I'm sure we'll have some critiques as well to jump in or have you. So without any further ado, we're going to right into it. And we'll get into the very first pick. So the order was random. We did a snake draft based on the pods themselves. So Chris, you had the first pick on behalf of In the Deep. Who's the first overall pick in this draft? Who you got?
No pressure, right?
Nope.
I feel like I might have wound up taking the Adalberto Mondesi first overall of this draft, but I went with Dylan Cease, who I went with him because I feel like of all of the 350 plus pitchers, this is the guy who has the best chance of jumping into like the top 40, top 30 starting pitchers. And there's no sure things in the 350s. So I went with the guy that I thought had the most upside amongst pitchers, or the most easily realized upside, because he's not a rookie. He's been around for a couple of years now. And I don't want to like kid you guys. He wasn't good last year. The surface numbers were a little bit misleading because he put up like a 4 ERA, but his expected ERA was closer to 7, which, yeah, that's not good. So he's got great stuff. If you look at his Savant page, it's all blue with the exception of his fastball spin, fastball velocity, curveball spin. So the guy can spin it. He can get up there on the velocity readings, but he hasn't been able to turn it into good production so far. So what do we want when a pitcher has stuff but not production? We want him to, figure it out, figure out what he's doing wrong and how to make that leap from just having good stuff to being a pitcher. And it appears he's on the right track. We heard stories this offseason about how he recognized that his fastball was cutting. He didn't really want it to. He recognized that the fastball command was bad. We heard reports and saw videos of him working out and trying to fix these things. And for some people, this is the most encouraging thing of all. The White Sox brought in Ethan Katz, who was supposedly the brains behind fixing Lucas Giolito. Some people attribute a lot of value to bringing in a new pitching coach to fix a pitcher. So there's things working in his favor. I like hearing that a pitcher has very clearly seen what his issues are and is taking the right steps to resolve them. And we know he's got the stuff. Like, yeah, that the stuff is filthy. The slider has like a 40% whiff rate. The fastball it's hard. It's got spin. If he can get that spin to more of a rise than a cut, then he's already throwing it up in the zone. So we could see some more whiffs with that fastball. I think he's got a really great opportunity to take the next step this year.
Yeah, we had the opportunity of talking a lot about Dylan Cease last week on our episode. I said a lot of the same things personally. I've got Cease in a ton of places right now, and I'm not stopping. He's typically my 8th or 9th pitcher, but he is typically on most of my rosters, ends up being on my starting 9, at least in NFBC formats where you have 9 pitchers starting each week. So, Chris, have you had a chance to actually draft him anywhere yet this year?
I have not. I'm making a tough keeper decision right now in my AL only league, where I have him for $6 or $7, and he's right on that borderline of keeper cut. Maybe you guys can help me. But and I do have him in one of my dynasty leagues, so I haven't drafted him, but I was already in on him last year in a couple places, clearly. So the question now is, do I continue to stay on him? And I think the answer is going to be yes.
Yeah. So what I like about him too, personally, just from an ADP standpoint, he is post 350 on average, but in that same time period, he's got a min of, I think it's 256. If you look around at the guys that are going in the ADP of 256 in that time period, you're looking at Liza Hernandez, you're looking at Zach Davies. And is there anybody here that wouldn't pick Cease, those guys?
So I think Hernandez belongs higher than that. So I don't think I would take Cease above him, but Gonsolin, absolutely. I like Gonsolin's skills better. We have no idea how or when he's going to pitch this year. And Davies and Cease, you draft for completely different reasons. So I would say that's a push. It depends on whether you want the risk and upside of Cease or the consistency and change up of Zach Davies. But I think I tend to go for the upside, so I probably would wind up with Cease there, unless I had a really risky pitching staff already. So yeah, the answer is yeah, I'd be comfortable drafting him up there.
All right, great. That's good insight. Anybody here want to push back on this pick? Is there a reason why you think that Cease shouldn't have been maybe this first overall pick, or are we all in agreement that like this is a target of everybody?
I'll say that for me, I like him a lot more in keeper leagues than I do in redraft, and maybe that's just because I'm the keeper league guy and I'm supposed to talk about keeper leagues. But I could easily see a situation where Cease spends April, May, June figuring stuff out, working his new stuff together, working with Kratz and getting stuff in shape. And by July, August, September, he's the pitcher you want him to be. And in redraft, you have to decide if you're by May, you've got to be like, am I sticking this out, right? Or am I giving up on him? In keeper dynasty formats, you wait that out if he's making any progress, and you wait and see how it goes, and then you've got yourself a long-term starting pitcher you can be super happy with. That's my only concern with him, but I don't disagree with anything Schwebzy said. I think that there's a ton of upside here. When you're picking a guy at 350, 360, something like that, getting a guy who could be a top 40 pitcher, I don't know why you would pass on that. It's a great opportunity.
And I'll echo what I said on our pod last week. His schedule his first month of the schedule is not exactly, he's not facing a bunch of world beaters. He's got the Angels to start off. And if he's the number 4 start, he'll get the Angels. If not, he gets Seattle. Kansas City's in there. Cleveland's in there. The Cleveland baseball team's in there. Boston, Cleveland again, Texas, and then Detroit. So there's not a lot of fear per se as far as offenses go, in my opinion. So if he didn't figure something out, you'll know right away, I think, at least in the first month of the season. So you won't have any problems dropping him, especially in a redraft league.
Yeah, the scheduling thing is something that like I have in my head but haven't verbalized nearly enough. Like I love AL Central pitchers this year, especially if they're on like Chicago or Cleveland, where one of the better teams is already knocked out of their schedule.
Exactly.
Or Minnesota, of course.
All right, we'll move on to the second pick. So let's see, Pete, you got the second pick. Who would you grab?
So I went with Brendan Rodgers. He's a guy that Chad and I have been talking about, at least in the last episode, but I feel like he's come up in the past. I think he profiles as your typical kind of post-hype sleeper. And really, there's no reason the hype should have died down on Brendan Rodgers. Now, I think we can get out in front and acknowledge some of the glaring issues with him. First being playtime. He's going to have to really earn his playtime this year. Right now, Roster Resource does have him slated to be the starting second baseman. I'm sure I'm not sure the Rockies want to give him that opportunity because they are the Rockies. Assuming they do give him that opportunity, though, and they certainly have every reason to, he will still have to fend off Garrett Hampson at second base if they're still trying to keep Hampson in the middle infield, although it looks like he might be splitting time in the outfield. Nevertheless, nothing is sure with Rodgers at this point. His major league experience has involved a lot of strikeouts. His strikeout rate at the MLB level has been 32%. And lastly, his shoulder, that's the biggest concern. It's ended both of his campaigns so far in his major league career. And it's led him to just having 32 games played at the major league level. With that said, the first shoulder injury put him out for surgery. That was a mess. That ended his 2019 campaign. But last year when he was shut down with the shoulder, it really wasn't as concerning. But it was a minor injury. He played basically a week of games, and then he was shut down for the year because it was the end of the season and the Rockies weren't going anywhere. So if the shoulder doesn't concern me, the strikeout rate doesn't concern me that much either. Through over 1,600 at-bats in minor league baseball, his strikeout rate is 19%. So that 32% through 32 games seems like an outlier to me. So what you're left with is a middle infielder, a second baseman. It's a tough spot to fill, who's still just 24 years old, has all the pedigree in the world, going to be playing at Coors, should have a long leash. I think he could be pretty awesome. Very recently, he has been awesome between 2018 and 2019 at AAA. We're talking 56 games played. It's 212 at-bats. He hit 9 homers, hit 311, and that was with an 881 OPS. And granted, the sample size was small, but it's still refreshing to see him putting up those numbers when the Major League experience recently and throughout his very short career has been so poor. He was quoted saying this spring that he wants to steal 20 bags this year, which is music to my ears, baby. How much of stolen bases, Scott White on CBS talks about this a lot on the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast, that stolen bases, so much of it comes from intent. It's not necessarily you just look at the sprint speed and say, there we go, there's 30 stolen bases. It's intent. So Rodgers may not appear that fast, but if he wants to steal 20, maybe he gives us 12, and that's pretty awesome. So you add it all up. I like it this spring, 7 for 21, 2 homers. I'm in on Brendan Rodgers, and I definitely feel comfortable taking him with the second overall pick in this draft.
Makes it feel so much more important when you say it like that.
That's right.
It's
Nice.
very funny because Schwebs and I just recorded our podcast right before we're hopping on here with y'all. And we were both so incredibly just blasé, just like whatever about Brendan Rodgers. And I will say that you convinced me a little bit, Pete.
Okay.
I'm on board a little bit. So I'll give you kudos for that. I'm still not super on board with him. I would rather, if I was going for a second baseman, take Nico Horner, is someone that I have my eye on. But I still think that I am now much higher on Rodgers than I previously was. So kudos to you, sir.
I'll take it. Thank you very much. Horner, to touch upon that, I like him too. I think his play time is going to be pretty safe. The Cubs have a lot of pitch to contact pitchers, and they're going to want his glove at second base. There's a lot of speed there, definitely more speed than Rodgers. Like Rodgers can say he wants to steal 20 bases, but Horner can actually do it.
Yeah, he's got 93rd percentile sprint speed, and then Gold Glove nominee last year. So the defense is going to keep him on the field if he gets the opportunity. And one of the big buzzwords in spring training, he has a stance change. Ooh, he changed his swing or his stance. So he's opened up more, hopefully allowing his athleticism to play a little bit more. And he's been reaping the benefits of that, going 9 for 16 with 3 doubles and a home run. And 2 stolen bases so far in spring training. So that's my quick little pitch for Nico Horner. Sorry, this is about Brendan Rodgers. I apologize, but
Brendan Rodgers is ADP obviously is past 350, but his min I think is around 304. So Pete is 304 that range. That is a ADP of one Wander Franco. Other infielders include Scott Kingery, Bobby Dahlbeck, corner, and just below that, Elvis Andrews. So are those guys that interest you a little bit more? The thing about Rodgers' ADP, it's very tight, especially for being this far down in drafts. We're looking at a min of 304 and a max of 477. And so ADP of 387, this is a guy you definitely are going to be able to get past the 350 mark in most drafts. So you're not going to have to make them in, but is that something you think you'd be willing to do?
I would absolutely make them. I probably am the min over Wander Franco in this format. Yes, just because does anybody ever know what the Rays are going to do? I'm not going to put my eggs in that basket. The Rockies are a sure bet either. Those other names, Andrus, Bobby Dahlbeck, who's the human embodiment of modern day baseball, strikeout, walk, or home run. I think that's all he's ever done since Little League. So yes, I would prefer Rodgers over them. And at his min around like Ty France, Starlin Castro, Jonathan Scope, Tommy La Stella, I would actually definitely take him above those players. I think the range of potential outcomes for those guys is very small and not that exciting. Maybe Ty France, I get it, he's having a big spring. Rodgers' upside, though, I think is higher than all of these players except for Franco, who I'm not sure gets the play time.
I would like to point out that we have christened Bobby Dahlbeck as Robert K. Dingers. So please spread that around.
All right, moving on. We got the third overall pick. We go stay here with On the Wire. Kevin, you're going to start. We have back-to-back picks. Kevin, you got the first one. Who did you grab for our team?
For the same reason I took him very late in GFBI, I took him as the first pick here, going post 350. Marwin Gonzalez qualifies everywhere except shortstop and catcher. And that just left things open for us here. We literally could do anything with our other 2 offensive players. And there's nothing special about him. He might back up at any position except shortstop. Obviously not catcher. If you prorate his projections, he's a mid to upper teens home run guy, 70 RBIs, 75 runs over a full season. A guy that can play any position, and my backup when I only have 30 roster spots, so you can back up anybody. I just see a lot of value in that. And yeah, I took him in the 28th round at TGFBI.
So that's only two rounds before the end. He's going in most drafts. He does end up being that filler spot on most teams. And we talked about this pick before he made it. And I love personally, I liked the flexibility it gave us to go where we needed to go as we started looking a little deeper into the draft pool. As a Sox fan, I do worry about how much playing time he's going to get in any given week, but there's gonna be an injury, and the Red Sox themselves have said, or Alex Cora has said, there's strong possibility like they're going to keep a minimum amount. They're going to be able to keep a minimum amount of bench bats just because of the flexibility of the guys that they signed this year between Kiki Hernandez, Marwin Gonzalez, and what have you. So they're going to have a lot of flexibility to give more playing time to those guys as well. So really, there's a lot of different ways you can go with these last couple picks in my mind. And one of those is just volume, like the guys that you think are going to be able to compile numbers and what have you. So I think this is a solid pick, especially for a guy that's going to sit on your bench. There's a chance Martin sits on your bench. If he doesn't get hurt, he just sits on your bench all year and you never drop him, just because you're going to have to pick up a guy at some point during the season to fill a position. Now you don't have to. There might be a guy that's hot or super hot and you really want, that's fine. Spend your fab on that. But with Marwin on your bench, you don't have to go ahead and fill. You don't have to spend the fab on a guy just to fill for an injury, especially if it's going to be a short-term injury per se. Anybody want to critique that a little bit? To echo what Kevin said at the beginning, he's boring. He's definitely a boring guy to have on your team. He's not exciting, especially in a draft like TGFBI, where most people say, get your guy. I don't think Marwin Gonzalez is anybody's guy.
It was exciting in 2017. What was behind that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Wink. So I got to say, sorry, go ahead, Schwebs.
I do want to dig a little bit here. Do we think that there's any upside here as far as the change in scenery to the AL East, where you've got Camden, you've got Toronto's temporary stadium, you've got Fenway and Yankee Stadium, which are all pretty good hitters parks from what I understand. Do you think there's any upside here that we could see a little bit of a return to that totally legitimate and clean form?
I don't think you'll get that consistent playing time. It's enough that those ballparks definitely advantageous. And the biggest thing for me here is hit 211 last year, short season. He's hit above 247 every other year of his career, going back at least to 2014. And he's projected 240s to 255 in that range. So you get somebody that's not going to kill your batting average, and he's probably going to play 4 or 5 times a week, give you the counting stat that you need rather than taking a 0, especially if you have somebody with just a short-term injury that you just need for a week or two. And absolutely, yes, the AL East ballparks and really help in that department as well.
Marwin's a great example of a guy, too, who you have to know your roster, because if you get into those late rounds and you don't have positional flexibility on your team, you need that on your bench, right? You have to put yourself in a position where you can actually fill in for those guys. My TGFBI team, I happened in the early rounds draft a bunch of guys who play multiple positions. And so by the late part of the draft, it wasn't an issue for me. But I would say 75% of the drafts I'm in, that's not the case. And you get to those late rounds and you're like, okay, I need a backup shortstop and a backup second baseman. I need a backup this. I need a backup that. It's really nice to be able to take one guy and he fills 4 of those spots all at once. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. Like, he may not bring upside, but he gives you the flexibility to take somebody else who does bring upside, because you don't need that other person to do anything for you, because Marwin fills in for everybody. And so that flexibility on the roster lets you talked about it, Kevin, right? Even in this little 6-player 3-team draft, he gave you guys the flexibility to do whatever you want with your other 2 offensive positions. In a big 30-round draft, something like that, it's really helpful to know that you can have some fun with a couple of those last picks, because you took the safe, boring Marwin Gonzalez with one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And to harken back to what Adam said before too, like something that I didn't even think of was this is going to allow you, it's going to technically free up more fab dollars for you, because you won't have to fish for a guy off the wire at some point in the season to replace someone who's going on the IL for 10 days or something like that, which is fantastic. So that utility in and of itself was something I didn't even take into consideration, but is a really good point.
All right, great. That was the logic behind our next pick, or similar logic at the time of the next pick that I made for the season. So we finished up this draft earlier this week, and I ended up going with Alex Reyes, and I slotted him in because I figured we could pretty much put him in any of these pitcher slots on this roster. There's a chance that he could make the rotation, and there's a chance he could be a reliever. And obviously we have an open pitcher spot anyway. It's since been announced, Mike Schultz said that he's going to be a reliever this year. But he also put the caveat in there that they have a goal of him hitting 100 innings pitched as a reliever this year, which is lofty. especially for a guy who can't hold up under anything for the most part, or at least hasn't been able to show it. But let's just say that's the ceiling. If he can hit 100 innings pitch as a reliever, that puts him in a great spot over the course of the entire year, especially if he can keep up with the projections or what he's done in the past. I know K per 9 is not the best stat, but just to be able to extrapolate that over the course of an entire season, if he keeps at 11 K per 9 as a reliever, he can still get you, 120 or so strikeouts on the season. Now, that's if you have him in your lineup the entire season, which I'm not going to say that you should. But Alex Reyes also gives you the very similar stats in that respect as, say, like a Devin Williams, who's going at an ADP of 174. And so if you're willing to spend the draft capital on Devin Williams, who, he might back his way into a few saves, but I think in Milwaukee, for the most part, Hader's going to lock that up unless he gets hurt or gets traded or what have you. Alex Reyes is going to give you the very similar stat line, if you will, at the end of the season. Again, as long as he holds up under pressure as well for injury and what have you. He's also, in order to hit that kind of an inning pitch limit, he's going to have a lot of 2-inning outings. He'll probably come in as a follower and maybe be able to pick up a bunch of vulture wins for you as well if you pick the right spots. And this guy that might live on your bench for half the season, and he might be in your rotation for the other half of the season as well. So I think this gives us a little bit more flexibility. And the upside, this is definitely an upside play. You never know. Rotations, I know they want to see if he'll hold up for the whole year, and that's why they say he's going to be a reliever all year. But everybody knows you can never have too much pitching, too much starting pitching, and the injuries are going to happen. There's a chance he backs his way into a spot start here or there as well. And under the right circumstances, he's the guy that you're going to want to stream anyway. So yeah, anybody want to critique that for me?
It hurts my soul that they're talking about like Ponce de Leon and Gant as their fifth starter while sending Reyes to the bullpen. Hurts my heart as a fantasy owner and baseball fan.
It seems like particularly in a season where a lot of starting pitchers are probably not going to get much more than 130, 150 innings. I don't understand why they wouldn't give him a shot to throw those 100 innings in a smaller number of outings as a starter. But if they're going to do whatever they're going to do, a reliever who throws 100 innings is more valuable this year than they've ever been. Because that 100 innings is, instead of you could replace him with a starter and maybe get 150, instead of replacing him with a starter and maybe getting 200, which is what you might have looked for in the past. And so I think you're going to be, this year more than ever, I think it's great to have those bulk relievers. I also think if you have a daily lineups league, those bulk relievers are great because they're predictable. They go one day, they throw 2 1/3 innings. They don't go the next day. They probably don't go the day after. And then you go 2 days where you put them in your lineup because they're going to throw one of them. And then they're back on the bench again for a couple of days. And so you can actually use them really effectively in those daily lineup leagues. So I love Reyes. I think it sounds like maybe Freddie Peralta is getting stretched out a little bit to be an actual starter, but he's another guy who seems to be going much earlier, but a similar, might get 100 innings as a relief / starter swingman type guy. Like, I love those guys. They're super useful.
Yeah, and the guy's going around his min. He's got a 305 min in this ADP sample that we were looking at. And there's a couple starters in there, interesting starters, if you will. But it's Matthew Boyd, Griffin Canning, Josh Lindblom going back to back, right around that same spot. And as unpredictable, I guess, as you can say, Reyes could be just with the injuries, and he's got to bring down his walk rate and what have you as well. I think that, Chad, to your point, being able to bring the predictability of what you're going to get out of Alex Reyes as a reliever compared to what you're going to get out of, say, Matthew Boyd as a starter, even with the K upside there, is something I'm probably willing to stretch out and create a new mid there as well for that. Moving on, Chad, we'll go back to you. You've got the 5th pick on behalf of Keep or Cut. Who after Pete already picked your middle infielder or corner infielder, I guess you could have filled it in either way. With Rodgers, who are you going to fill in with?
So we stuck with offense. We took our outfielder next. As a Cleveland fan, this is a little bit of a homer pick, but I'm going to make it anyway. We took Josh Naylor. And Naylor's a guy who I've been really interested in for a long time. I was actually thrilled when Cleveland traded for him. What he's really needed is, I think, opportunity. And he hasn't really gotten it. If you look at his track record, particularly in the minors, in the high minors, he had a little bit of a rough first go in AA, but 2018, his second stint in AA, and then 2019, his first stint in AAA, He had a 11.1% walk rate in both those years and a 12% strikeout rate. Anytime you can get a bat who is capable of walking almost as much as they strike out, that's a pretty good place to start. And Naylor does that as well with a 115.1 max exit velocity in his brief major league career so far. So you've got a guy who doesn't really strike out a whole lot, walks an awful lot, is capable of hitting the ball extremely hard. He makes contact at a really high rate. His in-zone contact rate was 90.4% over the course of the last 2 years, which out of 311 players was the 49th best. So he controls the zone. He puts the ball in play. He's capable of tapping into a lot of power. And down at this point in the draft, I think he's got upside that very few guys at this stage do. And for him, those 383 plate appearances he's got over basically 2 major league seasons are in 134 games. So he hasn't really ever gotten consistent playing time. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does this year because he's going to get it. Cleveland needs him to basically be a presence in that lineup. There aren't a lot of other guys around him to do that job. And so he's going to be in there every day and he's going to get a chance to get into a rhythm and to show what he can do. And I just, the building blocks are there for a stud.
I really like where he's at in the lineup too. The top half of Cleveland's lineup is a really good lineup. Now, he may not score a lot of runs because the bottom half leaves a lot to be desired. With Cesar Hernandez, Jose Ramirez, Eddie Rosario, Franmil Reyes, and then it looks like we're expecting him to hit 5th. He's going to have a lot of traffic out there in front of him.
Yeah, for sure. No one's ever going to drive him in. I'm very glad you stopped after Naylor because the last thing I want to do right now is think about the back half of that lineup. But yeah, he's going to be, and I think there's a chance that as the season goes on, he may move up. He actually is, I think, in a lot of ways, an ideal second place hitter. And so if Cesar Hernandez either doesn't hold that job with all the youth that Cleveland has coming up in the middle infield, or if he struggles and needs to be moved down the lineup, I think you could see a shuffle that leaves Naylor hitting in the middle of that group rather than the end of that group. But I think the worst case scenario is that he's terrible and he ends up cut or something. But the realistic worst case scenario is that he's hitting at the end of that group and like you said, has a lot of traffic to knock in.
I got him in the 24th round of my TGFBI, and I would love nothing more than for you to be totally on the ball with this. I know it was only 7 plate appearances, but how impressive was he against the Yankees in the playoffs? That was just such a wild performance. And I know it's the smallest of small sample sizes and huge small sample size warning, but man, like that will stick with me for a while.
It was just so visible. And I think the point I made before about he wasn't getting consistent playing time in San Diego, he came to Cleveland and watching him every day, it felt like he was trying to settle in, trying to get into a rhythm, getting used to being an everyday player again. And then something just clicked. And it clicked for 7 plate appearances, but it clicked for 7 plate appearances on the biggest stage he's ever been on. And yeah, it was incredible to watch. And I think every time I look at him, and the one thing he doesn't do for you that I'd love an outfielder this late in the draft to do is steal a few bases. But I'll live with it because I think that he could put up a high average and a lot of power and some good counting stats. And I'm a big fan of what he does. You got him 24th round. I got him 25th round. And I almost took him about 2 rounds earlier. I sat on him, kept thinking, at some point, someone's going to take him out from under me. I'm going to be super frustrated. And they never did. So I got him in the 25th. I was very happy.
Good thing you guys are neither in my league because I ended up grabbing him in the 20th round. I would have set a new mid on this ADP. Yeah, so I'm a big fan. A lot of this actually came from, we had Alex Chase on the pod last week, and he had glowing reviews for him as well. I'm pretty sure that pick came like the day after we recorded that. I'm also of the opinion that there's an outside chance he gains first base eligibility as well in that lineup, playing the field. It's always the ongoing joke that Cleveland always needs an outfielder. So there's always an opening for an outfielder there. But their first base isn't exactly locked up. I'm pretty sure that Bobby Bradley's having a pretty good spring though. So
yeah, Bradley's killing the ball. And Jake Bauers is out of options. And Cleveland has a nice long history of not letting those guys go. And so my guess is they're going to give Bauers every chance at the beginning of the season to prove that he can stick. If and when he doesn't stick, they're going to give Bradley every chance to prove he can stick. If and when he doesn't stick, that's where Naylor's potentially got a shot to move in, I think, and end up with some time at first base if they decide that they'd rather give someone like Daniel Johnson more time in the outfield, something like that. But I'm not banking on him getting first base. I think there's a chance he could get it. I think if he does, it'll be late in the year, though.
If you're playing in a Yahoo league, he probably already has it because he probably jumped over the bag on his way to the outfield. Definitely an outside chance on those leagues that have very minimal requirements, if you will. And I know Yahoo only is a 5-game started requirement. But in NFBC, it'll take a little bit longer. All right. So let's see. Jordan, you're up next. In the deep, you guys have back-to-back. And Jordan, you made the first pick here, so why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So it's kind of sad. I will say that, Chad, you, sorry for the pun, nailed it with your pick, because I was actually thinking about taking Josh Naylor.
You should never apologize for a pun that's that good.
It was pretty good. I am actually pretty proud of it, honestly. I just wanted to feign actual embarrassment with it, but no, that was pretty
feign
good.
Humility. That's the way.
It's fine. So instead, I had to shift in and then also follow suit and be a homer and take Jackie Bradley Jr. with my pick. So when you look at Jackie Bradley Jr.'s Fangraphs page, there's a lot of it that looks pretty underwhelming. You probably wonder why I take him. He also just signed with the Brewers. He makes his premiere with them tomorrow, I think it is, against the Rangers. His 2020 stat line was pretty good, though. He played 55 games, had 7 home runs, 32 runs, 22 RBIs, with 5 stolen bags and a 283 average, which is a little bit above his standard for his career. I don't see him fighting Avisail Garcia for playing time in Milwaukee. So that was 1 plus right away. 2, lefties fare really well in Miller Park. And yes, I'm going to call it Miller Park and not American Family Field because I just can't get that out of my head. I'm sorry. Another thing was that he had the highest walk rate and the lowest K rate of his career in the shortened season. And all of his plate discipline metrics supported that as well, because he had the lowest O swing since 2015. His zone contact rate was its highest since 2016. And then his contact rate was the highest of his career, and he had the lowest swinging strike rate of his career as well. I think that his ceiling is actually pretty high. And having been in the AL East for so long, where the pitching is much better than it is in the NL Central, I think he has a pretty good chance of actually getting some more of that and unlocking it in Milwaukee. And I think he actually will probably end up beating his projections, which currently he sits on BAT-X at 128 games with 18 home runs, 67 runs, 64 RBIs, and 10 stolen bases with a 232 average. I personally think that he has the potential to go like 20-12 with a 265 average, as long as he gets his playing time. And I feel like, I don't know what the ADP is on him currently, but I would feel comfortable somewhere between pick 290 to 310, right around that 300 range, reaching for him in any of my drafts.
In the ADP sample that we were looking at, his min was at 279. Definitely somebody you're looking at least on the lower end of his ADP in this sample, for sure, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, too, is most, if not all of us, are in TGFBI, I believe. One thing that I've learned the hard way is that, because I don't do a ton of 15-team leagues necessarily, you should never, ever hope that a guy wheels to you, especially in rooms that are that sharp, because they never will. So you should reach for the people that you want. And I would feel okay reaching for Jackie Bradley Jr.
Yeah, we talked about that in our first pod, just talking about when ADP goes out the window for the most part. And I think Justin Mason made a joke on Twitter about it's at pick 1-1. But for the most part, you can see ADP meaning less and less as the draft goes on, just based on the differences on min maxes. And when you get this deep into a draft, ADP means absolutely nothing. And almost all of the mins, especially in the first 100, 150 picks of the draft, are all wheel picks. If you really look back, all those min picks that are set, they're usually right around a wheel, whether it's the 4 or 5 turn or the 10, 11 turn, doesn't matter. Because you want your guy. You got to get your guy that you think is going to be the best for your team. And you have to assume that they're not, like to your point, Jordan, you're going to have to assume that they're not going to make it back to you. What I like about Jackie Bradley, to your point, it's really weird. Roster Resource does have him as a platoon right now in right field, I think, which I think is really strange. I really think that as fantasy managers, defense doesn't do you any good in compiling numbers, except for the fact that usually a guy like Jackie Bradley will have defense that'll keep him on the field and keep him in the lineup. And so he will be able to continuously compile stats, those counting stats that he wouldn't normally be able to do per se with his talent level. It brings his ceiling up as far as those numbers go a lot higher. So I'm in agreement there. I see him playing a lot more in Milwaukee than I think that he's being given credit for at the moment.
Yeah. And then one more thing about Jackie Bradley that I totally forgot to mention was that also, yes, he's slated to be in right field in a platoon. He's strong side of the platoon. He's a lefty, so he's probably going to be playing more right there. Also, Lorenzo Cain has been dealing with a lot of lingering injury stuff, and he missed pretty much the entire season last year after opting out. If he's having trouble getting up to speed, there's still a chance that he gets even more starts in center field, just giving a spell to Lorenzo Cain as well. So he might find his way into more playing time that way too.
Yeah, I keep thinking that Cain's going to end up being the one in the platoon. Not so much a direct platoon, but that Cain, like when you want to get Avisail Garcia some plate appearances, you give him to him and give Cain the day off, regardless of the matchup, just because you can slot into center field who's going to play great defense for you and be solid regardless of who the pitcher is. And so if you can give Cain those days off instead of Bradley those days off at his age, the issues he's dealt with, stuff like that, it seems like the obvious move to me, but I'm also not a major league manager, so I don't get to make any of these decisions.
I will say that Craig Counsell is much sharper than I am, so I trust whatever he does.
Being a Red Sox fan myself, I have a hard time grappling with Jackie Bradley being a good fantasy player. But we've seen from Bradley in the past, he's incredibly streaky. And when he is hitting the ball, his streaks are like, he looks like Mike Trout for a month. And so if you just want to ride that this late in a draft, pick him up and hope you get that month and then say, see you later, that's fine with me. I also think the Brewers are clearly moving towards a more defensive approach. I think they've shown that with their moves and what they're doing with their infield, bringing in Colton Wong. So I don't think you go into the season with that kind of mindset, make these moves, bring in a glove like Bradley Jr.'s just to not play him. So I do think those plate appearances will be there. And if they are 20 and 12, like you said, I think that's within his range of outcomes.
Yeah, I love the Brewers' defensive improvements. My column on Brett Anderson being a Cy Young candidate will be dropping soon, so be on the lookout for that.
Can't believe he's still around.
Did you grab him in worst ball, or is anybody playing worst ball?
So it's a reverse jinx for worst ball.
There it is. All right, you guys in the deep, you guys have another pick. Chris, you made the next pick. You got your outfield set. You got your starter set. So which direction did you end up going?
Yeah, so we're through the first round, so I'm going to be a little more brief with this one. But we took Miguel Rojas here to fill our middle infield spot. I'm noticing that overall, when I'm evaluating players, the players that I tend to like at this point in time are guys with really good contact rates, but also bring something else to the table. I think in this era of strikeouts, I feel like this is a decent zag to make while everyone has these sluggers. It's an undervalued player right now, undervalued type of player. The nice thing about Rojas is that he's a popular regression candidate this year because people look at the sky high BABIP and they go, that's not going to repeat itself. And it's not to that extent, but he backed up that high BABIP with better batted ball metrics and really great eye at the plate with for him, a sky high walk rate. So I think there were some plate skills there to back up the breakout. And it's an underrated lineup in Miami. They've got some really nice veteran bats in that lineup. So if Rojas is setting the table for them, you could see a really nice like batting average runs player there. Like it's like maybe like a David Fletcher type of season. But I think the upside is higher because I think Rojas has a better bat than Fletcher.
Yeah, he runs more too. So the possibility of double-digit stolen bases for a David Fletcher type player is great at this point in a draft.
I love this pick. I'm in an NFBC 50s, and I got him in the 35th round.
It's gold.
I thought so too. And just looking at his numbers, I'm trying to find a reason not to like him. And when he was crushing the ball last year, and then it was the worst possible thing that could happen to a player like him, like finally getting this hot streak. He's past 30, where the Marlins got struck with COVID and it shut them down for a while. And if it was a fluke, I think that would have killed it right then and there. And we would have seen this regression back to what you would have expected from Miguel Rojas going into the season. But he kept it going after that. It was one of the most important players in that lineup. I don't understand why he's going so late, when especially in leagues that are this deep and have, the middle infield spot in addition to shortstop, in addition to utility. I just think he's a safe. Well, I shouldn't say safe. Nobody's safe this late. But when we're talking about players this late, he's safe for play time. And I just think he's pretty solid with those plate skills.
Safe for playing time is a key. That's what I'm looking at with pretty much all of my late round sleeper picks, is who's going to play a lot. Because you can't get stats if you don't play.
I'm going to be the one to throw some cold water on Rojas. Sorry. Oh, no. I agree that he is safe for playing time, and I think that's really valuable, because I think that you're absolutely right. This late, there's huge value in a guy who's going to be in the lineup, because you're probably not drafting him to be your starter anyways. So what you want is a guy who you can count on being able to plug in that week that you need to plug them in, which I totally get. I look at his season last season, and I don't know, the chase rate went down because he just stopped swinging. His contact rate also went down. He didn't hit the ball hard. If anything, he hit it a little less hard in some ways. His barrel rate was 0.9%, which is, I don't think that's good. I'm not totally sure, but it seems not good.
Not ideal.
And so I think, I don't know, I look back at what he did in 2018, 2019, and anytime before that, and I just think the floor is really low, and I don't think he hits the ball well enough for the ceiling to be all that high. And so I think, to me, there's other players this late in the draft who maybe aren't as safe for a playing time perspective, but can give you a lot more when they play.
All of that is definitely true, but I would argue that while the contact rate came down, it was still significantly above league average. And
that's true.
While the barrels weren't there, the solid contact was. He might not be hitting barrels, but he was hitting line drives, like a crazy amount of line drives. And that could be fluky. That could absolutely be fluky.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't go to Savant to look at his sweet spot, but I wonder if his sweet spot rate is probably pretty high. And he may be a guy who just squares up the ball and maybe doesn't hit it that hard when he squares it up, but squares it up. And there is a lot of value in that. So that line drive rate, if he can maintain that, maybe the piece that I was ignoring.
I'm ready to fight for my picks, man. I came prepared.
I figured we all were ready to fight for it. And everyone's been so nice, so I thought I'd just try to mix things up a little bit.
Yeah, not in here, not in this house.
Yeah. I wouldn't have done that, but you know what? Good for you, sweetie. That's fine.
And I'm from the Midwest too, so you would think that I would have that, but maybe I've been on a coast for too long, and so now I'm just like, no, let's throw down.
See, I just moved to the Midwest about 3 years ago, so.
Well, Adam and I have that Boston blood, so we'll try to keep that tamed.
I'm going to have my first internal pitcher list fight over Miguel Rojas.
Who had that bet?
Was that a board bet?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that we just touched on it in the fact that Rojas is going to be safe for playing time. And I feel like that brings in to the point that when you get to this late in draft, it definitely depends on what format that you're playing in. You talked about being in a draft and hold style league, and playing time is huge in that format. No matter how late the later you go, the more playing time, the better. But in a redraft league, especially in one that maybe doesn't have as deep of a roster, I think the more common way to go would be going straight upside, maybe throwing a stash on your roster that you think could come up. And so these are different ways that fantasy managers have to think about how their roster is already being constructed. We talked about this with Marwin Gonzalez earlier as well. And do you need that flexibility? Do you have the ability to take on a guy that's a little bit more risky because you did a really good job of holding on to or grabbing the safer guys earlier in your draft? Or do you need that guy like a Rojas or a Marwin or what have you that is going to have play time? Chad, to your point, that you're going to feel safe throwing in when you need to on any given week of the season. Definitely things to think about as you are drafting and you're getting this late in your draft. Think about what the format is as well. Going back to Jackie Badger Jr., talking about how streaky he is, he makes him a little bit better in, say, like a best ball format, just because you can ride those hot streaks and those slow peaks maybe aren't going to hurt you as much. All right, so Pete, we'll go back to you. You got the next pick here, the 8th pick overall. not mistaken, you guys have an outfielder already set up. You got Rodgers in your infield. So what direction did you end up going?
So we went with a starting pitcher this time. And I can only imagine if 4 years ago we looked into the future and we saw that we were going to be taking Madison Bumgarner in this post 350 draft. But he's still just 31 years old, which may not mean much. But this is a guy who is an ace. He fell off his dirt bike, hurt his shoulder. I think it was his collarbone, comes back, gets hit by a line drive, misses a bunch of time. And then he just seems like he hasn't been able to return to form, obviously, but I get into his groove again, get used to being Madison Bumgarner again. He's 1 year removed, though, from making 34 starts, striking out over 200 guys and having a sub-4 ERA. That was 2019, fresh off of those injuries in both 2017 and to start 2018. My co-host Chad gave me these numbers for the Bumgarner pick, and I thought they were fascinating because it's easy to look at his 2020 and say, yeah, this is a guy who's lost it. The home runs were a huge problem in 2019. They exploded in 2020. His ERA was like 9,000. But his velocity came back in his last two starts. Chad did a little research, and his velocity was up around 89 miles an hour those last two starts, whereas it was really at 88 for most of the year. And who knows if this is what did that, or if he just got into a little groove, or if he just got a little lucky. But in those last two starts, he posted a 1.59 FIP. He had a K per 9 up around 10, and he was walking less than one batter per 9 innings. He did not allow a single home run in those two outings. It's just two outings, but with a player like Bumgarner, we're just looking for anything. And then we see him come out this spring. He's throwing 91 miles an hour. Now, that was just one pitch where he hit 91. But he struck out all six batters he faced in those two innings. He was living around 90. During his peak years, he averaged 91 miles an hour with his fastball, really. And when I say his peak years, I really mean like the last 4 or 5 years or so. So it'd be nice if he was averaging it and not just hitting it once. But it's early in spring. He could be just working it back. So when we begin to look at it and say, like, all right, well, the last 3 times we've seen him, the last 2 starts of 2020, this spring start, he's looked really good, arguably dominant. He's just 31 years old, and he was a guy who was cruising until this incredibly fluke injury. Maybe he does still have a little magic left in him. And to give him a little credit, he talked about after that last outing, like what went wrong for him in 2020. And I think we can all appreciate his response here. And he was very clear that this wasn't an excuse. But he said, quote, "The only thing I wish I would have done differently last year was kept it at a steady pace, instead of getting way up here and then dropping back down and then getting way up again." And what he was talking about here was getting ramped up for the season. We didn't really know what to plan for. I was trying to take it days and weeks at a time instead of staying somewhere in the middle. I think that would have been more beneficial. So I should have provided more context there. It just sounds like he's going crazy and saying a bunch of words. But what he was talking about was getting ramped up for the season and how he had to like really get ramped up, thought it was about to start. And then it's like, oh, we're not even going to play this year. So he just sat down and probably killed rattlesnakes or whatever it is that Madison Bumgarner does for a hobby. And then I was like, oh, we're actually going to play this year. And he had to get it going again. To end my story, I like Madison Bumgarner at pick 369. That's his ADP. And I think we're pretty comfortable with that pick.
Anytime you can base anything on 2 starts, 1 pitch, and a bunch of gibberish, that's really what you're looking for.
Not to brag, but that's what we do over here at Keep or Cut. So that's at Keep or Cut with a K.
2 Ks, yeah.
Summarizing everything you just said, as a Kansas City Royals fan who watched what he did in 2014, and that wasn't the first time that he did that. Like you said, only being 31 years old, and his velocity when he was doing that, up and out on average 92 point something, and being 91.7, 91.8 the last 4 or 5 years, I find it really hard to believe if he can't get back to 90 plus, which it appears that he is. I find it really hard to believe that he can't be a good pitcher.
I gotta say, Pete, listening to you talk about Madison Bumgarner right there felt like Stefan from SNL talking about a club. This pig has everything.
It's got everything.
It's got dirt bike injuries, rattlesnake murder, 92 mile an hour fastballs.
Oh, that is spot on.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Sorry, I had to do it. I apologize.
I think I found my clip that I'm gonna post on Twitter.
Perfect.
Let's go.
Make a note. 103. The thing about Bumgarner too, he's one that's at least in this ADP sample. And keep going back to this because you got to really understand where you're going to have to make that decision. He's got one of the earlier mins of everybody that we've looked at. So he's gone as early as 239. And his latest 475, that 475 is not nearly as far from the 350 average, the 365 average that he posts. Going up to guys that are going around that spot, Pete, is this somebody that you're willing to take over, say, Ryan Yarbrough, James Paxton, Michael Pineda are going back-to-back right around that range? All very different pitchers, especially compared to Bumgarner in his history. Are those guys that you'd be considering more? And again, those guys have much lower mins as well, so you might not even have to make this kind of decision. But are those the types of pitchers that you take over him, or would you go Bumgarner?
I think I'd take all of those guys over Bumgarner, to be honest with you. Remind me the names again. I know one was Pineda.
Paxton and Yarbrough.
Yeah, I actually really like Paxton. Chad and I talked about Yarbrough in our last episode, that great changeup. I think he's got a pretty good opportunity this year. So I think I'd take all of them over Bumgarner. I'm thinking I'd take Bumgarner more over guys like Sean Manaea and Zach Davies, who I think you're hoping to get. I think Bumgarner, this is kind of high praise for Bumgarner, but I think Bumgarner's like most likely outcome is what you're hoping to get out of Sean Manaea and Zach Davies. And so I look at Bumgarner, I think maybe his ceiling, the strikeouts aren't going to be there. His ceiling could be somebody like a Kyle Hendricks. Again, he's 1 year removed from 208 innings and 200 something strikeouts. That's just 1 year ago. And it was a long year ago when you consider the injury history and you consider just how bad he was last year. But that's my long way of saying, no, I wouldn't take him over those players, but I would take him over other players. And you say Michael Pineda, I just have to bring it up. I watched him pitch against the Red Sox that spring. He just kept striking everybody out with changeups. That is one of the biggest people I've ever seen in my life. That man is a moose. And that is my thoughts on Madison Bumgarner.
Yeah, I brought it up before about looking at that early schedule, especially for these late picks, whether or not you think you're actually going to use them in your beginning of the season in your lineup. And Arizona doesn't have the easiest April, if you will. They travel, and if he gets the opening day start for Arizona, he'll over Gallon, which is still a possibility. He'll travel to San Diego. He'll get in Colorado right after that. He'll probably skip Cincinnati and host Oakland, but then he'll travel to Washington and then probably get Cincinnati in Cincinnati as well, and then probably host San Diego in Arizona. So not the most appealing way to start the season, but he might be a nice guy that if you don't feel trustworthy enough to put him in your roster to start, you hold on to him and see how he does through those types of those matchups in those ballparks, especially obviously the Colorado and in Great America and what have you.
I've just decided I'm going to put out a lot of trade offers to acquire Madison Bumgarner at the end of April. That's what I'm taking from that. It's like, all right, someone else draft him. You let him get shelled there. I'll come pick him up from you when you're frustrated and done with him and ride him the rest of the season. That's my new plan.
That's what we call a scoop and score.
I think regardless of schedule, if I draft him, if I have the luxury of leaving him on the bench for the first couple of rounds through the rotation, I think I'm going to do that because he was so volatile last year. But if you start seeing the velocity climbing up, starting to generate more whiffs, continuing to go deep into games like he was doing during his peak years, that's when I would start getting him into the lineup anyway. So regardless of the schedule, I don't think I'm putting him in.
Sure. All right, we'll move on to our pair of picks, our wheel, if you will. Kevin, you started us off with the 9th pick overall. What direction did you end up going in?
I went with Kyle Wright, and the most important thing that I have to do is forget about the last time we saw him, 2/3 of an inning, being shelled for 7 runs by the Dodgers in the NL Championship Series. Because the whole premise was that how great he was late in the season and for one postseason start. If you just short season, but it's really all we have on him at the major league level. He averaged less than 5 innings per start. However, his last 3 starts were all 6 innings or more. 19 innings with a 2.37 ERA against Washington Nationals and New York Mets, Boston Red Sox, all at least decent lineups, none of them horrible. And then 6 shutout innings against Miami in the division series. So he was pitching really well for 4 starts and then had that debacle against the Dodgers. But we were hearing about all these guys the Braves had 5, 6, 7 years now. And now Ian Anderson's coming along, and we got Soroka, we got Fried. And the guy that 4 or 5 years ago I kept hearing about was Kyle Wright. At this point in a draft, post 350, for somebody that just put up 25 innings, really good innings, sub 2 ERA innings against Major League Baseball teams, I'm ready to take this chance on him.
Those 2/3 of an inning against the Dodgers they're pretty good.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard.
As it turns out.
So you may be able to give a guy a pass on getting shelled by the Dodgers, but I'll say this. My TGFBI draft is still going. It is one of the very slow ones. We are in the 29th round and moving towards the end, and I have 1 pick left. And I think I just moved Kyle Wright up my draft board. I think he's still available as we move towards the end of the 29th round, and I'm intrigued. I thought I needed another starting pitcher. I wasn't sure who I was going to take. It may now be him.
So I'm gonna give a little bit of pushback here. So my thing against Wright is it's the walks. Like his stuff isn't good enough to get away with close to that level of control problems. That's really the end of it. There's just not a lot that I love in his, like, what he's displayed so far in the majors. He walks a lot of guys, but at least he gives up a lot of home runs too. Yeah, I want to see like either the strikeouts come up or the walks come way down. Either one of those things needs to happen for him to continue or have more success, I think.
Do you have any sense like why? So in the minors, right, his last sort of 2 tastes of AAA, he was walking less than 3 per 9. And in the majors, he's been more than that. He's about doubled his walk rate going from AAA to the majors. And now I understand that the majors are harder. And so guys are going to see their numbers get worse. But that seems like an extreme jump.
It's a big swing.
Yeah. How many sluggers strike out 20% of the time and then go to the majors and then it's like 35%? Like Bobby Dalbec didn't strike out 35% of the time in the minors. I think some guys just like this stuff they get away with in the minors just doesn't fly in the majors. And I don't want to say that is Kyle, but that's the main thing that I want to see. So I think so far in spring training, he's walked like 3 guys in 8 or 9 innings, which is better. That's certainly better. I need to see more of that.
What he was doing at the end of the season last year.
Yes. So if we get another 4 starts of that in the minors, I'm much more on board.
Yeah, it reminds
I know it's spring training. I know. But
talking about
just got to say it against major leaguers is my thing.
Talking about that raised walk rate once you hit the majors reminds me of another Atlanta pitcher, and it makes me wonder how far I can dive into if this happens to multiple Atlanta pitchers. And it's Bryce Wilson went through a similar situation where the walk rate wasn't that bad coming through, and he was a highly touted prospect in his own, and his walk rate of like anywhere between 6 and 7% throughout the minors. And then all of a sudden he hits majors in 2018 in limited sample, jumps up to 18%. 2019, he's at 10%. Last year, he was at 12%. Makes me wonder if it has anything to do with Atlanta and how they've treated those really young, promising pitchers. That's not to say that's not something that obviously has shown in limited sample that he can try to fix.
I feel like if you looked at everyone who comes up from the minors and pitches for the first few times in the majors as well, some combination of 1, nerves, 2, facing just hitters with just much more advanced plate discipline will probably lead to them striking out fewer people and walking more folks, because some of the stuff that they can get away with in AA and AAA against some of those hitters with some of their off-speed pitches that are way out of the zone, major league hitters are going to pick up on that stuff much easier. So I think that's part of it too. I don't think it's necessarily like a Braves thing, but just more so a general going from the minors to the majors thing. Yeah.
And to Kevin's point, like he was walking guys like crazy when he first came up. And then after that return on September 8th, it was 2 walks, 1 walk, 3. And that's much more manageable. So yeah, that is absolutely an encouraging sign.
Well, I know we're going ADP of 350 or more, but I was pretty happy to have Kyle Wright at pick 554 in a draft and hold I did earlier this offseason. I felt good about that one. All right, so we'll move on to my pick, the second half of On the Wire picks. And I stayed on the same team. Actually, full disclosure, I did pick Miles Straw and then realized that he was ineligible. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus here on that one. Yeah. Anyway, went back and ended up grabbing Christian Pache. Really, I was looking to make an outfield pick here, or a hitter pick that's going to give me some kind of a possibility at a speed boost. Everybody knows how difficult it is, especially if you're trying to win an overall situation like a TGFBI as an overall component. You can't really tank any in particular stat, and how difficult it is to grab as many stolen bases as you can to at least make sure you're in, the middle ground of that stat in your league. So Pache gives you that opportunity. He looks as though he will probably win the starting center field job in Atlanta, which I think was expected. But now with the news that Ender Inciarte is having problems actually holding a baseball, puts him a little bit behind everything in my mind. So he might be at the bottom of the lineup. That's Pache, but he's similarly to, say, Jackie Bradley or some of these other guys we talked about. He has the opportunity of compiling because his defense is going to keep him in center field. Obviously, the other two outfield spots are spoken for, so he'll be stuck in center field, which is where most of his talent is going to keep him anyway. Again, he can simply be a compiler at the bottom of the lineup, but at the end of the draft, that's going to play, and he's going to be able to get plugged into your lineup when it's necessary. The guy has 70 grade speed. He hasn't really been able to use it properly, or at least smartly, if you will, if that's a word, in the minors. He can use it, and with the proper tutelage, if you will, he still has the potential of tapping into 2020 production. The beauty, I mentioned it before too, with the early schedule, there's 2 weeks, 2 out of the first 5 weeks of play in fantasy. The Braves don't have a day off. So that's also nice as well, especially in like an NFBC format where you're stuck with your hitters in your lineup at least half of the week, and knowing that you can plug him in and compile those stats, assuming he's going to be in the lineup every day. It's a nice thing to have. Anybody got some cold water for me on that one?
I can't justify talking trash about this pick after I just went on about liking my late round picks to have strong defense.
He's a younger Jackie Bradley Jr. at this point, and potential to be more. So everything we said about him with the elite defense, keeping him in the lineup and compiling, counting stats, it's all there.
I also think I've learned over the years that guys who are just good baseball players, I'm not going to bet against them. I never thought Francisco Lindor would hit the way he has, but his defense was going to keep him on the field, and he had enough skills and enough talent, and he put it together. I certainly did not expect Ke'Bryan Hayes to put together the rookie season he did last year, but he's got a glove that's going to keep him on the field and give him a chance to get his bat when he did, and he was incredible. And I think more and more what I'm learning over the years is these guys who look like defense first guys, that just means they have all the time they need to develop. The Braves aren't going to give up on him just because he has a rough stretch, because his glove is going to be that valuable. And so I think those guys I think they're more likely to reach their ceilings because they're actually given the opportunity to struggle and fail and learn and develop and get there. And so I've gone from a place where a few years ago I was out on all these defense first guys, and now I'm in on all of them.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
All right, Chad, thanks for all the kind words on my pick. I appreciate that. We'll keep it with you. You had the 11th pick for keeper cut. And so, what direction did you end up going with here?
I think Schwebzy was foreshadowing my pick a minute ago when he said how many guys have a 20% strikeout rate in the minors and then are striking out 35, 40% of the time in the majors. Because I took Evan White, and Evan White had a 23% strikeout rate in double A, his last run in the minors, and then 41.6% in the majors last year. And yeah, that happens to guys, and it's bad. A 41.6% strikeout rate is a problem. The thing with Evan White is when he makes contact, he makes good contact. He was 87th percentile exit velocity, 90th percentile barrel rate, 95th percentile hard hit rate at StatCast last year. His ex-WOBA on contact was 458, which out of 310 guys with 100 plus plate appearances was 32nd. So when he hits the ball, he does good things. He was a little bit, I don't know if unlucky is the right word, but his actual WOBA on contact was 399 last year, not close to that 458, more sort of top third rather than top 10%. But what it says to me is there's more there. He's capable of putting up really strong numbers when he hits the ball. And yes, guys sometimes come up and are unable to catch up to major league pitching and really struggle with it, and those strikeout rates jump. I still think he's going to be a guy who settles into maybe a 25 to 30% strikeout rate. Maybe it doesn't get down to the 20 to 25% that he had in the minors, but he can bring it down quite a bit from where he was. And if he does that and continues to hit the ball as hard as he's been hitting it, good things are going to happen. And on top of that, the Mariners are committed to him. Like, he's their first baseman for the foreseeable future. So like we were saying with Pache a second ago, White's going to get his opportunities. So he's going to have an opportunity to figure this out. And he's going to keep being out there every day at first base until he either brings that strikeout rate down or loses his job. And it's going to be a good long time because the Mariners have nobody else coming at first base. They got a million outfielders coming, but they don't have anyone coming at first base. And they've committed to him. They've got a contract with him for 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is. So he's going to get a lot of opportunity. I think he can bring that strikeout rate down. And if and when he does, that contact is going to shine through.
And it's another case of that Pache type of guy. There's other things keeping him on the field besides his bat. Like a lot of money.
And the contract. Yeah.
A lot of money, a good glove, and a 41.6% strikeout rate.
And he smokes the baseball when he's not striking out.
Yes.
He's tooled up. Great defense, really fast, especially for a first baseman, and hits the heck out of the ball when he does hit it.
All right, we're moving on. We're getting, as Nick would say, we might go a little long in this podcast. I had to get that in there. And so we're going to keep moving along. Jordan, you have the next pick for in the deep. And so I have to mention this. Your pick was also the same pick as Danielle Salinger we had on the pod a couple weeks ago. And it was her late round pick as well. But Jordan, tell me a little bit about your pick.
So this is one that Schwebs and I discussed a little bit, and we went with Brandon Belt. I didn't really think of Brandon Belt that much, but I actually have a really fun fact. Can anyone in here right now name off the top of their head what Brandon Belt's WRC plus was last year? No looking it up. No looking it up.
I know it was stupid high. I want to say like 170.
Okay, that's a guess.
I was going to say something right around there. He was really good. It was good. That's what it was.
Because his walk rate was like 17.
Yeah. He had a WRC plus of 173 last year.
Oh,
almost nailed it.
Insanely good. Insanely good. To go over his 2020 results, he had 51 games with 9 home runs, 25 runs, 30 RBIs, and a 309 average. So not only did he have a 309 average, but he also had a huge, like an immensely large walk rate as well. Like a career 12.1% walk guy. So you're going to get that every single year with him. He'd be a little bit better because we did draft this as if we were doing a 5x5 standard rather than on base percentage, but still valuable in both, I think. The crazy part about all of this is that he was playing the entire season with a heel issue that he got surgery on in the offseason. Like in mid-October last year, he had surgery because he had a bone spur in his right heel that he was playing the entire season with. He had missed early in camp and then he missed summer camp in the first few games of the season with an Achilles issue as well, which might have just been this bone spur that was in his heel the entire time. And even though he had that lingering injury, he was amongst people like Juan Soto, Freddie Freeman, Marcell Ozuna, and DJ LeMahieu as far as offensive performers last year, which was nuts. He also stated that 2019, which is a really poor year for him by his standards and just in general, he was still not back at full strength from a right knee surgery that he had in 2018 and didn't have enough time to build up the strength in that leg. And that's why his 2019 was so poor too. So the fact that he was able to, even through this bone spur in his heel, manage to perform as well as he did, I really don't see why he can't repeat that as long as he's able to stay healthy this year. Maybe not necessarily repeat, but perform at a high level. The only real issue is that in San Fran, it's a pretty big platoon split squad. If you look on roster resource, there's 4 guys coming in and out depending on the handedness of pitcher. You really don't want to start Brandon Belt against lefties. Last season against lefties, he had a 115 average with 1 home run and 2 runs scored. Just not good at all. But then against right-handers, 350 average, 8 home runs, 23 runs, 24 RBIs. Really great. I think that if you can get him around pick 350, that's an absolute steal. I would be fine reaching for him around pick 275, personally. And the added bonus, too, is that if you're playing on Autonew or Yahoo, he's also got first base eligibility. as well. So he could fill a corner infield spot too.
I don't really understand why he's going so late. He's been such a good hitter for so long. And I know that San Francisco has always hurt his numbers because that park is a tough place to hit. But they also adjusted the fences last year. So I don't know if that helped or made much of a difference. But like, I just don't understand why he's going this late.
Yeah. So two things about that. Yes, they moved the fences in slightly, I believe. They also opened up the gates. I think it was in right field.
Yeah.
Something like that last year. Since they didn't have fans, they opened all that up. And apparently that made it a much friendlier hitters park in general, which is why you saw so many San Francisco Giants players outperforming what they were expected to last year. So that is certainly something to look into. San Francisco is one of the most staunch areas in terms of how they're handling the pandemic. So they're not going to have any fans in the stands as of opening day currently. That's not in the plans. So maybe they still follow that same procedure and everything's going to be the same. And for the first couple months of the season, you'll see San Francisco hitters popping off again. But then once they start allowing fans back in, maybe they close that back up and maybe you'll see a shift in performance from that point on. Who's to say? It's really hard.
So this is opposite. We're gonna draft Brandon Belt and trade him for Madison Bumgarner
at the end of April. Boom. Perfect.
Belt's playing time, if it is, he clearly played above his head last year. So then the question is, how hard is he going to come back down? And with Joey Bart, he was terrible in his limited experience last year. But when he inevitably comes up this year, now we've got the Buster Posey question. It looks like Evan Longoria is starting the year on the bench. They've still got Wilmer Flitt. There's just a lot of players that Belt is going to need to continue to produce and hit from both pitchers. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that, especially once Bart gets called up. Then it becomes a playing time issue. But we're talking this late, it's a playing time issue with every single one of these guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's always going to be a risk. And the thing is, like right now, pretty much every major projection system has him playing, I think, at least 126 games. So most folks aren't worried about it necessarily. And I'll take 126 games at this point. Even like 100 games, honestly. And if it's going to be someone who's going to rake against righties, like Belt is, I'm more than happy to take that.
Especially if it's a daily lineups thing too, where you don't want him facing lefties. Like, yes, exactly. Just play him against the righties and let me accumulate these stats.
Like we had called out Brandon Belt on in the deep, and I got yelled at by Yancey for the early season schedule. They're facing the Dodgers. You don't really want Belt against the Dodgers, where he's going to see Kershaw, Price, Urias possibly. So yeah, he's golden in your daily lineups where you can actually pick and choose where you start him.
Perhaps just not the guy that, if you're the type of player, fantasy manager, who just doesn't want to do a lot of work, who doesn't want to have to, they want to set and forget it, maybe Belt's not the right guy for you in this situation. But to echo what you guys are saying, the daily moves, or even in an NFBC where you still switch out your hitters at least once a week, being able to do the work, see what his matchups are, and see if you can gauge whether or not he's going to play in advance. If you're willing to do that work, I can see him providing dividends. All right, we'll stick with in the deep. Chris, you had the next pick. You got two pitcher spots open at this point for your team. So what direction did you end up going?
So I went with Trevor Rodgers. You got to be careful because there's a lot of Rodgers around, and I think literally all of their names start with a T. So it's great, easy to mix them up. But Trevor Rodgers, the Marlins starting pitching former prospect, and I guess now he's a major leaguer. He has recently blown up in the fantasy analyst universe because Ray Butler just published a fantastic piece on him and how he's on the brink of potential stardom. It's a lot of qualifiers, but the point is the skills last year were fantastic. He performed well below his expected production in basically every measure you can think of. Even his walk rate was high, but his expected walk rate was half of that. Meanwhile, the K rate was 30%. And if you have a K rate that starts with a 3, that's nice. Unless you're talking Alec Mills and the K rate is actually 3. But the point with Trevor Rodgers is there's a really nice chance that he blows up if he has a couple of nice starts early and becomes a really popular pickup. So he's going so late. Grab him now at the end of your draft before he blows up. Get on ahead of that and profit. And he's going so low that, what's the cost? You're just not picking up Keegan Aiken instead, whatever.
The cost is it's actually saving you money. Does it go to our point earlier about your fab? If this is a guy who's going to blow up early in the season, you're going to save a lot of money on the back ends of not having to. And this is that stash play, if you will. This is a guy who he might cost you a lot of money to pick up if he's doing well. And if he's doing poorly, Chris, to your point, he cost you your last round pick. It's just a typical roto league where you have 30 draft picks or what have you, or 30 spots in your roster. It's your 30th round pick. It's not hurting you.
Like, even amongst these guys that we're talking about, Rodgers is going pretty late.
I took him with the 26th round of my TGFBI. And mostly because I was making that pick right around when that article you mentioned published. And it was like, it came, 4 different people sent it to me, and I saw 4 different people tweet it out, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to take him. I'm not waiting. It's the 26th round. I'm not getting into that exciting now anyways.
I had the unfortunate circumstance of being in the same league as the person who was highest on Trevor Rodgers, so I didn't get the chance to snag him, and I'm very disappointed about that. But Jordan and I co-manage a dynasty startup that we just did at Pitcher List, and we made sure to grab him there.
That was very much a get your guys dynasty startup, I will say.
Oh, yeah.
Not a great dynasty startup.
I got my guy. I got him.
Yeah, he went 624th in drafts and hold that I'm looking at right now that I was in earlier this offseason. That was it finished about 3 weeks ago, though. So, that ADP could change, especially with the recent news. All right, now we're moving on. Pete, you had your team's second to last pick here, and let everybody know who you went with.
Sure. So we went with Mize. He's got an ADP of 398. This late in the draft, I don't know if there's any individual pitcher with as much upside as Mize and ability to explode on the scene. And that really comes from having that one dominant pitch, and that's his splitter. And his fastball's mid-90s, that grades his slider, cutter. Those also look like solid pitches. They were in the minors, and they certainly were at Auburn as well. But that splitter is what separates him, and it's why I expected him to make an immediate impact in 2020, and he didn't. And I think that obviously hurt his chances of starting the season with the Tigers this year, and I think that's certainly that makes this pick risky, because this is a redraft format. So even this late, you might end up completely wasting this pick if Mize finds himself just making 3 starts in September. At the same time, the upside, if he does get called up earlier, is huge. He'll have to probably beat out Tariq Skubal, and even then, the Tigers have 5 starters. I just don't trust really any of them. Turnbull, I know there's a lot of people in Spencer Turnbull's corner. I don't get it. Michael Fulmer can never stay healthy. Jose Urena has been a reliever mostly recently, and I certainly don't trust Julio Teheran. And Matt Boyd, who has given up 6,000 home runs over the last 2 seasons. So my point is, in doing a quick analysis of the terrible Tigers rotation, is that nothing is safe there. So I think Mize is going to be a constant threat to get called up. And when he does, with that awesome splitter, which honestly, am I crazy to say that's already one of the best pitches in baseball? Like, I think it certainly could be. He gets called up, leans on that. We're looking at a pretty solid pitcher. His biggest issue was walks last year, walks and home runs. And that just wasn't a problem with him at Auburn. And that wasn't a problem with him in the minors. So I think it was just nerves and getting called up in such a weird season. It wasn't the debut he wanted, but I think it's still a pick with a ton of upside for 2021.
The only reason I would throw any cold water on this is I guess 2 reasons. One, I actually do like Turnbull. I do agree that a lot of the other names in that starting lineup currently are pretty bad. The other name that I would throw out there as someone who I think is going to challenge Mize is getting Matt Manning his chance in the majors as well. And I think that's the one person that most folks, especially in the fantasy community, are highest on in terms of that big 3 between Mize, Skubal, and Manning for those starting pitchers. I'm wondering when Manning is actually going to make his debut. I'm obviously excited for that, but I do think that I agree with you when you say that splitter is probably the best pitch out of the repertoires of all 3 of those guys. It is absolutely disgusting. I know that people salivate over it in the Discord. Whenever nastiest pitch season rolls around, we're always looking for stuff like that, and it's a very good one.
Manning was definitely somebody I considered. I guess we went with Mize here because he does have that major league experience. But you're right, because it was so negative, maybe it was like hold on a second, this kid needs more time, because he has been fast-tracked. He was, a draft pick in 2018? He is so young. So if they look at that and wait a second, this was a mistake, let's give him a full season in the minors. God forbid, then this would be a waste of a pick, in which case I would be interested in Manning because I think it makes it obviously that much more likely that he would get the call. I think we're probably all in agreement that we like Scooball the least of those three. Not that we don't maybe like Scooball. I don't. I think he's got plenty of upside. But out of those three, I'd put him third. It depends on how the Tigers view Mize's 2020. Was it we made a mistake here, or was it this kid got called up in a weird year and let's see what he can do with a normal build up and everything else?
Exactly. You'd love to get into the heads of the leadership in Detroit and figure out where they're ranking them yourselves. But yeah, I don't know. I think they're all pretty close. It's a crapshoot. They're all great. Don't get me wrong. I would love late to take a flyer on any of these guys. But yeah, I think I would agree with you though that my rankings are probably Scooble last and then have Manning at the top with Mize there in the middle.
Mize did walk 3 in his only spring training appearance so far. It was just 2 innings he walked through. I'm pretty sure all 3 of those walks were 2 strike counts. One was he had somebody 0-2 and it should have been a called strike, wasn't, ended up walking the guy. He knows it's an issue. It's a new issue for him from what I can tell, and he's trying to figure out his way through it. It's just, this is a pure, obviously, upside pick.
I think I would like to throw in here, because I came up with a term for pitchers who are victims of bad ball strike calls, or just hitters in general, people in general, being touched by an angel. So it seems like that's what happened there.
All right, we'll keep it moving. And Kevin, you're the next pick, the first of our last 2 picks. What direction? We have a pitcher spot open, and we have flexibility in the infield just because we have Marwin. But what direction did you take us?
I went with our last pitcher here. And like Trevor Rodgers we were talking about earlier, only maybe not one article, just everybody on Twitter. This guy is not going to be available outside the top 350 for much longer. And that's Tejay Antone of the Reds. I want to look at this in a weird way. Everybody's talking about the battle between him and Michael Lorenzen for the number 5 spot in that Reds rotation. And I was one that was big a couple of weeks ago on Wade Miley as a temporary fill-in early in the season, draft him, use him in the first full week of the season as their number 4 starter when he pitches against Pittsburgh and Arizona, and then your first drop of the year. Now he's got a hamstring issue. He says he's fine. It's precautionary. He may not even get that early couple of starts. We may be looking at Lorenzen and Antone. And Lorenzen didn't look at all on Wednesday against the Royals. I believe it was 3 runs in less than 3 innings, and they were teeing off on him. I was watching that game. So Antone's not going to be available outside the 350 for much longer. He was for this, so I snatched him up.
I don't think you're going to get any pushback on this one.
This was probably my favorite pick. Part of it was luck because of what happened with Miley, but at the same time, Tejay Antone's fantastic. This is probably my favorite pick of the draft.
I think if the Miley news had come out prior to this draft, I would have went Antone over Rodgers. So yeah, I love this pick, and it's only gotten better with time.
All right, there's no objections, so we'll move on. That's a good pick. That's what we got. That's what we've heard. I went with a very classic post prospect hype guy in Carter Kieboom. He got what many say are like the line driver hitters. He got LASIK in the offseason. But anyway, he already had a decent eye, pretty high walk rate. He could see the ball. He just wasn't producing. He didn't produce in his time. He forced the issue to come up in 2019 and did absolutely nothing. 2020 was not any better as well. The thing with Kieboom, what I like is not only the fact that he's probably has a starting position. Dave Martinez said that third base was his gig to earn. He didn't say it was his gig to lose. He said it was his gig to earn. But all signs are saying that is going to be his position, and he'll be the starting third baseman. And third base is not exactly the deepest position. And to get a backup third baseman with promise, with potential this late in your draft. And if you can only, in my mind, if you can only pick one position, at least one infield position to back up on your bench, third base is going to be the target of mine personally as well. So I'm also not worried about too many players on the Nationals overtaking him at third base. Sure, they can move starting Castro over to third, but then Josh Harrison's not going to be your starting everyday second baseman, in my opinion. And then most of his spring training lineups, he's in there with the starters as well. So it's showing that he's going to be there pretty much every day beyond your typical days off. And again, like I said with my other picks, at least with Pache, he's going to hit the bottom of that lineup in Washington. So he's going to be a compiler as long as he's in there every single day. But it's still an upside that I'm willing to make. And somebody at the same time, safe in a sense where I know I could plug him in at any given week to fill in if necessary. Is anybody here just completely out on Kieboom and just not somebody you're considering whatsoever?
When we did our corner infield preview, he was my pick because I love the plate discipline. I love the plate approach. And it's weird to me that it completely fell apart when he hit the majors. I think he just got jerked around a lot by the team. And if he just gets a more consistent role, then I think he could start to flourish. I think my comp for him was like if he hits what I think he could hit at his peak, like he could be like an infield Alex Verdugo with the line drive, middling power, decent batting averages, good walks.
I like that comp. And Carter Kieboom is like my favorite kind of post-hype sleeper, somebody who the playing time is just going to be there. There's somebody who, you know, as Shobi was just getting at there, he's had inconsistent opportunities really because of the team. It's similar to my pick in Brendan Rodgers. Now with Rodgers, it was a lot of injuries, but there's also been players in the way. A player who has a lot of upside, been jerked around a little bit, and now has an opportunity for everyday at bats, has the pedigree. It could be a compiler. And I think, although Kieboom, in my opinion, doesn't have the upside of Rodgers, he's in a better lineup. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for him to be pretty good.
Overall, we are just a nice group of people that are just saying really nice things to each other. So yeah, that's nice.
We're being really uplifting to each other. This is the positivity that we need
Miguel
right now.
Rojas.
Yeah.
Poor
Miguel.
Reason for anybody after 350. You know?
I was just going to say, to be this positive about all these guys that nobody wants in any draft.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. He's been really bad so far.
Yeah.
We just think he's gonna be better.
Yeah.
Be a spin team, honestly. Yeah.
All right. Well, that fills up our roster. And so, Chad, why don't you fill up your guys' roster? You only have a reliever slot left. So go ahead and who'd you go with since Tejay was off the board?
Yeah, so we needed a reliever and wanted to take somebody who we thought at least might get saves. And the Tigers are not going to win a lot of games, but somebody is going to be their closer. And I'm betting on it being Gregory Soto. And I think that in addition to him being the most likely to be the closer, he's got the most talent of the guys that are in the running to close there. He needs to control the walks, which we've talked about with some of these guys before, but he gets a lot of strikeouts. He gives up hard contact, but keeps the ball down. And so most of that hard contact ends up on the ground and not over the fence, which is always nice. His overall numbers last year weren't great. He had a 4.30 ERA, 3.76 FIP, but going into his last outing of the season, it was a 3.18 ERA and a 3.37 FIP. The last outing still counts. Maybe this is the Kyle Wright rule. You can't ignore it just because it was the last thing you did. But it does give you a sense that like he went 59 days, if not 60. Really good numbers, not elite relief pitcher numbers, but certainly good enough that if he gets the closer job, he's not in that much danger of losing it. He's good enough to hold that job for a year. And so is he a guy I'm counting on long term? Do I think he's going to be their like closer for the next decade or something like that? No. But I think at some point in April or May, he's going to get a shot to close a game. He's going to strike out a couple of guys doing it. He's going to take the job. And in September, he'll still be closing games for them. And if I can get a guy who closes for a few months after the 350th pick of a draft, I'll take it.
Yeah, this is I don't know how it's possible in a 3-round draft to get sniped twice. But I was looking at Gregory Soto because we also needed another pitcher here. And I was thinking about Gregory Soto as my pick. And then you sniped him up right before me. So that was good job is all I really have to say. You stink, but good job.
I'm never going to begrudge somebody for save speculating at the late in the ADP run. What am I going to yell at you for not taking Brian Pena instead? Like, come on.
You could.
I could, but I'm not going to.
These are the types of picks, again, are going to save you fab, especially if it's a guy you think could walk into the role early on in the season. He might not start the year, but if he comes in just a month later and you have enough flexibility in your lineup to hold him, to stash him, and you know what? He's still going to be productive. He's still going to be productive in your lineup if you need a guy in there even if he's not getting saves. And again, this will save you fab later because especially in this market this year, going into this year, saves are going to be a hot commodity on the wire as well. And so to be able to have that in your back pocket, that could save you anywhere between 50 to 150 bucks in fab on $1,000 budget. So this is definitely a valid way to go with your last pick.
Yeah, and I took him in the 29th round of my TGFBI. So he's going super late. He was basically free. I'm looking now, I'm realizing he is 1, 2, 3, 4, at least the fourth player that we've talked about in this draft who I drafted in my TGFBI, which might be too many of these guys to have taken, but I'll live with it.
Chad just did all his research based on his own draft of TGFBI before.
No, my TGFBI draft's been slow. I waited for you guys to tell me. You're like, these are the guys we would take late in drafts. And I was like, okay, click.
It's like the only advantage of having one of the slowest moving drafts in TGFBI is that you get the extra input from all of us now.
That's right. I'm going to go crazy if this draft doesn't eventually
now,
end.
You've got 28 drafts worth of ADP data to base your picks off of now, too.
All right. And Jordan, take us home. You get the last pick overall, Mr. Irrelevant of irrelevant players. Who'd you go with?
I'm not going to be super long on this person because they didn't have a 2020 for us to even go off of, but I took Emmanuel Clase. I think that's how you say his last name. I really hope that's right. I apologize if it's not.
I think it's Clase.
Emmanuel Clase? Okay,
I think
sorry.
so.
Emmanuel Clase.
You'd think I would know this, but he had never actually pitched for my team. So
yeah.
I don't actually know.
We really need a media guide so we actually say this correctly. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name. I'll just refer to him as Emmanuel from here on out. Anyways, there's nothing really to say about him other than he throws absolute gas. He was ranked in the 100th percentile in 2019 in fastball velo and 97th in spin. He missed 2020 because he had a PED suspension, missed the entire season, is now back and eligible to play. The big question is, which is the question everywhere across the league, is who is going to close for this team. Right now, it's a three-way battle between Emmanuel and then James Karinchak and Nick Whitgren. It's really hard to say who's going to win that. I don't really know. I haven't read up enough on who is currently in the lead, allegedly, for that job. But I just figured I would take the guy with the most electric stuff because I feel like he's the most likely to end up closing. ATC projections currently have him pitching 60 innings with a 3.52 ERA, a 1.25 whip, and 61 Ks and 6 saves. If he ends up winning the closer job, I think that the inning count's going to go up and obviously the save count is going to go up. I just think that the stuff is way too electric. Obviously, right now, I think James Karinchak is a much more popular pick for folks. He seems like the favorite going into this. But when you have a guy who throws a 100-mile-an-hour cutter and a 91-mile-an-hour slider, I'm interested instantly.
So my Cleveland fan view on this is that I think Whitgren's going to get the job. And that's not to say anything about this pick. I think this is a really good pick. Tito's made a couple comments about wanting Karinchak to be available in earlier parts of the game. He wants him to be his fireman that he can throw out there when he needs a strikeout, which totally makes sense. Mm-hmm. And Francona has shown, and the Boston guys, you can tell me if it was the same in Boston, but in Cleveland, he has got his circle of trust. And there's the guys he's willing to put into big situations, and there's everybody else. And right now, I worry that I now looked it up. I think it is Clase. So I'm going to apologize for correcting you before because I was wrong. But I think Clase is outside that circle of trust. And I don't think that's because he's not good or anything like that. He's never pitched in a major league game for Francona. And so I think he's going to have to earn his way into Francona's good graces before he gets the 9. And so my guess has been that it's going to be Whitgren. I've been drafting Whitgren on that basis, but that's me speculating as a Cleveland fan, not any sort of inside information or reporting or anything like that. It's just the way the team has been run recently, what I would guess.
Oh yeah, you can use the best context. Pick. Oh, sorry, go.
I love this pick. He's super talented. And I think that if I was looking at keeper leagues or dynasty, I think there is a chance that we look 3-4 years from now and he's been the closer for most of that time with Karinchak staying in that fireman role, or that they've been sharing it, but Karinchak's been getting earlier, higher leverage situations. And so it's a 60-40 or 70-30 split with Clase getting the majority.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like right now, so many of us, especially in these late rounds, but even before that, outside of the top 6 or 7 like actual closers, capital C closers. We're all just doing guesswork and using our best information that we have to make these decisions. You, as a Cleveland baseball team fan, have a better inside line than I do, and I think are probably more in touch. So I would respect your Whitgren pick if you think that he's going to get the job. And I would want to, from this point forward, probably lean that way, because I think you probably have a better feel for what Francona is going to do. But regardless, I think that the ratios that Clase will provide, along with just like the absolute stuff that he has, will allow him to pitch in a lot of high leverage situations and maybe nab a few wins here and there too. So I feel like it's still fine at this point.
Chad, it sounds like you think Francona is trying to turn, well, his ideal situation for Karinchak would be his new Andrew Miller. And so I was curious, does anybody know if Emmanuel Clase was a guy who could go multiple innings? Is that something that he showed throughout the minors or during his time in Texas? Because maybe it ends up that he is the new Andrew Miller, and that opens things up for Karinchak.
It doesn't really look like he's done a ton of that. I mean, it's hard to tell, but in Texas in 2019, he had 21 appearances, one of which was a start with 23.1 innings pitched. In his last minor league time, AA 2019 as well, 33 appearances, again, one as a start, 37 2/3. Yeah, he could go a little more than an inning. It sounds a couple times a season, not as his regular thing.
Sure.
Yeah, getting like 4-out saves or what have you, or 4-out relief appearances, finishing an inning and then coming back the next inning and pitching 3 more.
Yeah, and Francona does that a lot in general. Cody Allen wasn't doing a lot of multi-inning appearances until Francona decided that he and Miller could both get 5 outs each and carry them through playoff games. So I think he'll get those 4-out appearances here and there, but I don't think he's like a early Josh Hader 2 innings at a time kind of guy.
Let's be honest, more relievers probably could get those 4-out appearances. It's just not what managers do nowadays. Sorry, I'll get off my porch and stop yelling at kids now.
No, and with this situation, it's a little different than so many of the other situations with teams that are so frustrating to us as fantasy players. Using Karinchak the way that Francona wants to use him is probably what he should do. It's frustrating to us. But what we have seen with him in the past is he typically does stick with a 9th inning guy. Maybe it's not going to be Karinchak, and maybe it will be Whitgren, just for the chance. There's going to be so many teams that don't have a guy, just to have a chance that Clase might be that guy. At this point in the draft, it's worth a shot.
It's really fun being a fantasy owner and simultaneously being like, we want managers to be smart with their relievers, but we also, can you please just name a closer? Pretty please.
And the thing about Cleveland too is it's not even any clear, like they're not really trying to do like a closer by committee thing either, because they're all righties as well. That's another thing too. They're not trying to play splits one way or the other. So it just makes it even more unclear. It's a tough one.
It's going to be an interesting situation.
Mm-hmm.
That is the advantage for the Clase pick over the Soto pick that I made. Is Hinch has a history of just using whoever he's going to use, right? When he had Osuna, he used Osuna, but other than that, he bounced around. It hasn't been always obvious who he's going to close. And I think there's a chance that, I think that Soto could take the job and run with it. There's also a chance he takes the job and runs with it for a week, and then someone else gets it for a couple days, and someone else comes in, and then so it's back to Soto. I think that, Kevin, you're exactly right. Tito's going to pick a guy, and he's going to go to that guy in the 9th, whether he should or not, to be perfectly honest. And so there's a good value here in if there's 3 guys and it could be any of those 3. If you guess, you get a big prize.
All right. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the elongated time. And this is definitely our longest pod of the short season so far. So I appreciate you guys taking the time. Jordan, Chris, why don't you remind everybody where they can find you, your work, where they can listen to you and all that.
Cool. Individually, you can find me at Bunt Singles. Shared, you can find Chris and I at In the Deep PL. And then Chris, you want to toss him your handle?
Yes, you can find me at Schwebsi, SHWEBSI.
Nice. And you guys put out your In the Deep podcast weekly as well. When does that go out?
It's usually available on Saturday mornings early. So we usually have it out around 5, 6 a.m. is usually when they drop. So they're always ready for folks on Saturday when they get up after sleeping in, ideally.
Perfect. All right. And then Chad, Pete, why don't you let everybody know where they can find your work and everything that you do?
Yeah, you can find me at Pete B Baseball. You can find us together at Keep or Cut. I don't know why I keep saying at. It's obvious that it's at, but I'm in a habit here. And Chad, you can let the good folks know where they can find you at
Chad Young on Twitter. That is where I'm at. Yeah, we are the Keeper Cup podcast, again, focused on keeper leagues and auto new. Comes out usually on Mondays. We're looking to do a 2-episode week this week because we're trying to get some stuff in during draft season. We may have something coming out Sunday and then again Monday, but usually it'll be Mondays.
Nice. Thanks, you guys, again for taking the time. And I know I appreciate everything you guys are doing. If you're not listening to Keeper Cut or In the Deep yet, you're doing it wrong. Make sure you tune in. You can listen to both those podcasts wherever you're listening to this podcast as well. So that's going to do it for this week's On the Wire. As always, make sure to give us a follow on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. Join PL Plus on pitcherlist.com, and you can pick all of our brains and the brains of countless others on the Pitcherlist Discord. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and give us a rating and review. It's always appreciated, especially for such a young podcast like ourselves. Special thanks to everybody joining us: Pete, Chad, Chris, Jordan, of course, for Kevin Hastings. I am Adam Howe, and with that, we bid you goodbye.